Hurricanes are known for being some of the fiercest and most destructive storms Mother Nature can produce, with intense wind, rain, and storm surge often having the potential to all but level a coastal region. However, these storms usually stay in the tropics, never deviating terribly far from the warm, humid, and stable conditions near the equator. On very rare occasions, however, hurricanes can form in interesting places, often bringing these same impacts to places that aren't prepared for them in the slightest. Now, before we get into the land of the strange and unusual, I'd appreciate you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so before we get into what's unusual for hurricanes, let's go over what's the norm. As I stated in my hurricane video a bit ago, these storms require warm water and humid air to form. To be specific, hurricanes do best over water temperatures greater than 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. In addition, humid air is needed since it provides moisture and thus fuel for the hurricane to continue spinning. But there's one other factor that I didn't really talk about in that video that's also important for hurricane development: wind shear. Wind shear is essentially winds blowing in different directions at different layers of the atmosphere, which has the potential to all but tear apart an organized hurricane and prevent a new tropical storm from coming together. In a region where wind shear is low, water temperatures are high, and there is enough moisture, a hurricane will likely form and develop. These conditions are usually found in the northern Atlantic Ocean, the northern Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean, generally between the months of May and November. There are some regions where hurricanes are a little less common, such as the southern Indian and southwestern Pacific Oceans, mainly due to slightly cooler waters and a more unfavorable environment in general. But what about places where it is highly unusual to get a hurricane at all? To start, let's look at the place that's getting the most media coverage as this video is being made: California. At first glance, California seems like a prime target for a hurricane, since both the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific basins are active with hurricanes, and the east coast of the US gets hit with them semi regularly. However, there are two factors that prevent a hurricane from wreaking havoc in California. The first is wind patterns in general. Thanks to the trade winds in the tropics, hurricanes in the northern hemisphere usually go straight to the west unless there's another force, such as a trough of low pressure or a ridge of high pressure, that's pulling them elsewhere. As a result, hurricanes usually move away from the Californian and Mexican coasts instead of towards them. But sometimes, a hurricane will start to get pulled northward, and landfalls on the Mexican coast are not uncommon. This leads into the other factor that usually prevents a California landfall: heat. You see, another reason the East Coast gets hit with hurricanes often is the presence of the Gulf Stream, a current of hot water that gets pulled up the East Coast and allows for hurricanes to survive further north than they would otherwise. Due to the layout of the Pacific Ocean, however, the opposite is true near California. There's a current of freezing cold water that comes straight from Alaska and the Arctic Ocean. This explains why hurricanes can't survive off the California coast, since there's just not the fuel of warm, moist air to keep them going. In order for a hurricane to make it to California before dissipating, three things need to happen. The storm needs to be moving fast enough so that it's moving over the cold water for less time. It needs to get strong enough beforehand so it has further to fall. And the water needs to be just barely warm enough to sustain the storm long enough to actually reach California. To date, these factors have happened twice in recorded history: a hurricane landfall in 1858 in Long Beach, and a tropical storm landfall in 1939 in San Diego. However, these factors are once again converging in 2023, where as this video is being made, Hurricane Hillary is expected to become only the third ever tropical storm landfall in Southern California, with the main threat to the region being rainfall so excessive that 2 to 3 years worth of rain could fall in the span of a couple days in some of the state's driest regions. Beyond actual tropical storm landfalls, it is not uncommon for remnant moisture from a tropical storm or hurricane to soak the southwestern US during summer, but the moisture levels in question are significantly less than they are during a full-blown tropical storm. Now, let's jump across the pond to another region that rarely sees hurricanes happen: Europe. As mentioned before, hurricanes usually go to the west in the Atlantic rather than directly to the north. This, combined with the generally cooler waters in Europe's Atlantic coast, prevents a major hurricane from actually making landfall on the continent. However, there is a way a tropical storm or hurricane can reach the continent. There is a geographic feature in the Atlantic known as the Bermuda High, and hurricanes usually go to the west of it, then ride the west side of it northward, and then curve east once it reaches the mid-latitudes. Thanks to the aforementioned Gulf Stream, hurricanes often remain at peak intensity until they reach latitudes of 40 degrees north or higher, after which they generally start to weaken. If a hurricane is once again moving over warm water long enough, it can, in theory, get close to or even make landfall in Europe as a tropical storm. This has happened 2 times in recorded history. In 2005, when Hurricane Vince made landfall in Portugal as a tropical depression, and in 2020, when subtropical storm Alpha made landfall in Portugal at near peak intensity. However, this low number hides the true impact hurricanes often have on Europe, as they usually transition into extratropical cyclones, or storms that still have strong winds and rain but have characteristics more resembling mid-latitude storms instead of hurricanes, before they actually reach the continent. Numerous storms have hit Western Europe over the years in this state, hitting everywhere from Spain and Portugal to Ireland, the UK, and even Norway. There is one more way a hurricane can technically hit Europe. In the Mediterranean basin, there is a special type of storm that forms once or twice a year known as a metacane. These Mediterranean cyclones often have many of the same features as hurricanes, like central eyes, strong winds, and rain, but they rarely ever produce winds greater than tropical storm intensity. On top of this, these systems are typically not considered to be real hurricanes, as they are colder storms in general that don't have most characteristics of a tropical cyclone. As a result, even though water temperatures in the Mediterranean can exceed the 80 Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius minimum for hurricanes to form, such warm waters aren't needed for a metacane to form, and they can and do form over much colder waters than this. To close off the video, let's look at the southern hemisphere. Parts of the southern hemisphere are very conducive to hurricane development, like the waters off of Madagascar and Australia, while the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are very active in the north. The same cannot be said for their southern counterparts. In the southeastern Pacific, the issue is very similar to California. A cold water current largely inhibits tropical development. This cold ocean current makes it near impossible for a tropical storm or hurricane to form east of 120 degrees west, and to this day, only a handful of subtropical storms have actually formed even remotely close to the western coast of South America. Most notably, a storm in 2018 formed as far east as 77.8 degrees west, which is just off the coast of Chile, and a tropical storm hit northern Peru and Ecuador in early 2023. But what about the southern Atlantic? On paper, this should be a conducive area for tropical development, as there is a warm ocean current off the coast of Brazil, and the area as a whole is humid. However, this basin has a significantly higher amount of wind shear than other basins in the world, which helps to tear apart tropical systems before they even get a chance to flourish. As a result, only a handful of tropical storms have formed in the South Atlantic over the years. The most notable event happened in March of 2004, when warm ocean temperatures and exceptionally low wind shear for the region spawned the region's first and only hurricane, Hurricane Catarina, which climbed as high as Category 2 intensity before it made landfall in southern Brazil. No other storm has achieved hurricane intensity in the basin, and even weak tropical storms have only formed once a decade on average. Overall, if you want a tropical vacation where you don't want to worry about hurricanes during the summer, look no further than South America. And that just about does it for hurricanes forming in unusual places. As always, I'd appreciate if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.